Before colonization, Africa was not a single place, not a single story, and not a blank space waiting to be filled. It was an entire world of kingdoms, cities, trade routes, and knowledge systems that existed long before most modern maps were drawn. And yet somehow many people still grow up asking the same quiet question: what did Africa actually look like before colonization changed everything? But that question only makes sense if you imagine Africa as empty before contact, and that is where the misunderstanding begins. Because long before colonial expansion, Africa was already deeply connected internally and externally with societies that built complex political systems, managed long-distance trade, and developed centers of learning that rivaled many parts of the world at the time in West Africa. Powerful empires like Mali, Songhai, and Ghana rose and fell across centuries, controlling vast trade networks that stretched across the Sahara Desert, moving gold, salt, ivory, and knowledge between Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. And in the 14th century, the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa became so wealthy through this system that his pilgrimage to Mecca became legendary, not just for religious reasons, but because of the sheer scale of wealth that reportedly influenced economies along his route. Yet what matters even more than the wealth itself is the structure behind it: organized taxation, governance systems, and urban centers that supported cities like Timbuktu, where scholarship was not rare or symbolic, but institutional, with manuscripts covering astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, and theology being studied, copied, and preserved in learning centers like Sankora, forming part of a broader intellectual culture that treated knowledge as something to be maintained across generations. And while West Africa built empires grounded in trade and scholarship, Southern Africa developed in a completely different direction, where Great Zimbabwe emerged as a massive stone city between the 11th and 15th centuries, constructed without mortar, but with such precision that its walls still stand today, suggesting not only advanced engineering knowledge, but also a highly organized society capable of coordinating labor planning, architecture, and sustaining urban life over centuries. And further east, the Kingdom of Aksum rose as a major trading power, linking Africa to Arabia and the Indian Ocean world, minting its own currency, building monumental stone structures like obelisks, and participating in international trade networks where Aksumite coins have been discovered far beyond its borders, showing clearly that Africa was not isolated but deeply integrated into global exchange systems long before modern globalization ever existed. But despite these examples, a common assumption still persists that Africa before colonization was static, fragmented, or somehow disconnected from global development. And that assumption breaks down quickly once you look at the evidence. Because across the continent you find repeated patterns of organization, adaptation, and innovation shaped by environment and trade rather than absence or limitation. And what ties all of these societies together is not uniformity but complexity. Different regions solving different problems in different ways, yet still producing systems of governance, commerce, and culture that were stable enough to last for centuries. And alongside these written and archaeological histories, there was another system that often gets overlooked, and that is oral tradition, where history, law, genealogy, and cultural memory were preserved through storytelling, spoken knowledge, and trained memory keepers, who ensured that entire generations and events were carried forward without written documentation, meaning that much of what existed was not meant to be stored in books, but in people, in speech, and in shared collective memory. When you put all of this together, empires in the West, stone cities in the South, trading kingdoms in the East, and oral knowledge systems across countless communities, you start to see that Africa before colonization was not defined by absence, but by variety, connection, and long-standing development. And the real distortion comes not from what Africa lacked, but from how selectively its history has often been told. And this matters more than just history, because the way we imagine the past quietly shapes what we believe about human potential in the present. And when entire regions are reduced to incomplete narratives, it changes how people understand identity, progress, and possibility itself. But when you look at the full picture, a different reality appears. One where people across an entire continent were already building cities, organizing trade, preserving knowledge, and shaping civilizations long before external contact, not waiting for history to begin, but actively participating in it. And once you see that clearly, the question is no longer what Africa was doing before colonization, but why such a rich and complex history was ever simplified in the first place. Because the deeper you look, the more obvious it becomes that Africa was never outside of history. It was always one of its central stages.